Well, welcome back, folks. It's been a little while since I've done a video, so we'll do a presentation today. The title of my presentation is Whose Virus Is It? And you'll understand my title as we get into the lesson. I presented this lesson to our house-to-house group this past Sunday and the Sunday before. It's done in a two-part series, so there'll be two parts to this lesson. When you come across it on YouTube or Facebook, however I upload it, look for part one and part two. And I titled it Whose Virus Is It? Referring to this coronavirus pandemic that we're all in. My subtopic is The Rulers of This World Have Gathered Themselves Together, talking about what the apostles prayed after they were come out of confrontation with the Sanhedrin. We also know that it is quoted and recited in Psalm 2, but the apostles were praying this, that the rulers of this world have gathered themselves together. This presentation is going to be in two parts. It's going to be a natural aspect, and we're going to look at the spiritual aspect. We're still looking at it from a Christian biblical worldview, but we want to talk about the natural components of this pandemic, and also part two will be the spiritual components of this pandemic. So let's go ahead and get started. What are some possible causes? The possible causes, again, strictly from a biblical standpoint, this is what many Christians are saying. So that's what we're going from that premise. Number one, some are saying that this is God-generated plague, similar to the 10 sent against Egypt. In other words, this is God's judgment on a world because of sin. So that's one aspect. We want to explore that and examine that. Number two is this is Satan caused, or, similar to Jannes and Jambres, who mimicked the plagues. Remember the 10 plagues of Egypt? I believe it was the first two plagues. The magicians, the Egyptian magicians, were able to duplicate. Well, I mentioned here Jannes and Jambres because the Apostle Paul in the book of Timothy, he gives us some insights onto the names of these individuals. In the Old Testament, when we see it happening, we see that it was just two Egyptian magicians. But Paul gives us some insight and tells us that their names were Jannes and Jambres. So they obviously operated with some satanic influence. And then also you see there, or is this talking about, Satan's influence over Job? He had the power to afflict Job. God allowed him to do that. So could this be, there are some who are saying that this current pandemic that we're in is caused by Satan. Then another way to look at it is this just simply because of the natural cause due to the world being cursed after the fall of Adam? If we remember the creation story and how God created the heavens and the earth, and then the narrative in Genesis tells us that everything he did was good, it was good, and then when he finished all of creation, he said it is very good. So God created the heavens and the earth, and he created everything perfect. Man was created upright, there was no sin in the world, and then when Adam disobeyed God, he brought sin into the world, and the Bible says that the ground was cursed for Adam's sake. And so again, is this the result of the natural occurrences of sin and disease and viruses that are introduced in the world because of sin? Or, point number four, is this generated out of an evil human heart due to the sinful nature? And we're going to explore that a little bit more when we get into the spiritual aspect of this. So those are the four possible causes. Is God judging the world with the coronavirus? Is Satan inflicting the world with his evil? Is this just a natural cause because we live in a fallen world? Or are the evil humans have a hand in this generating this virus and therefore causing a pandemic we're in? We're going to explore all those aspects. Let's look at let's look and see what the preachers are saying, because many people are saying, giving their views about what is happening. Now, I want to do a disclaimer. I'm not saying that these views are wrong and I'm right. I'm not here to say, oh, I'm going to set the record straight. Believe me, listen to me. That's not my point. You know me by now. You watch my videos long enough to know that I just always like to examine, various views. I'd like to look at the other stories. I always like to talk about things that aren't normally discussed and give somebody else something to think about. And so let's see what some of the preachers are saying. There's a pastor by the name of Rick Wiles, and he claims the coronavirus is God's death angel. That's his claim. The death angel that we see as the last plague in the plagues of Egypt in the days when the children of Israel were going to be delivered out of Egypt through the Exodus. He's saying that that's what this is. This is God has sent a death angel. Then there's also a televangelist. I've never heard of this woman, but I did some research and found this woman named Candace Smithyman. And she says that the new coronavirus is a demonic force from ancient Egypt that will require repentance and unity in the church to be defeated. Al Mohler is the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and basically he's the major voice for the Southern Baptist Convention. So he's very influential. Well, these are his views. He says that the coronavirus is the pale horse noted in Revelation chapter 6, verse 7 and 8. And we know that the rider of the pale horse, his name was Death, and then Hell or Hades followed it. So that's what Al Mohler says, and he has a lot of influence. So many people who value the words of Al Mohler, he's teaching that it's the pale horse. Some of them may believe that. Again, am I here to criticize any of these individuals? No, don't mistake me for that. I'm not saying anything against them. I'm just making, these are the statements that they've made. And then I'm just saying what we're going to do is we're going to just examine some of these things when we get to our spiritual aspects. But I'm just laying the groundwork now. And then also there are many Christians who believe that the coronavirus is the pestilence predicted by Jesus in the Olivet Discourse. When Jesus predicted the fall of 70 AD, the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and also he predicted his return. Well, he mentions pestilence and fearful things and diseases that are coming. So some people are saying this is what Jesus was talking about. All right, let's move on. Now let's see what the media is saying. So that's what the church world is saying. Now let's look and see what the media is saying. The New York Times blames evangelical Christians for the coronavirus. The New York Times published an op-ed that blamed evangelical Christians for the coronavirus pandemic. And it was written by an author named Catherine Stewart. In her op-ed titled "The Road to Coronavirus Hell was Paved by Evangelicals." So she specifically blames Christians, in particular evangelical Christians, for this coronavirus crisis. And part of her work, she writes this: Donald Trump rose to power with the determined assistance of a movement that denies science. So basically she claims that evangelical Christians are science deniers. So therefore, hence they are responsible for the spread of this. She goes on and says, this group, the evangelicals, bashes government and prioritizes loyalty over professional expertise. So in other words, we don't take the words for doctors and experts and scientists. We're just loyal to our believers. Well, she's saying the evangelical community is largely responsible for putting Donald Trump in office. So therefore, they are the cause of this coronavirus. That's her premise. She goes on to say, in the current crisis, we are all reaping what that movement has sown. Let's move on. Now let's see what some politicians are saying. So we've heard from the Christian community. We've heard from the media. Now let's hear from what politicians are saying about this virus. Because remember, this is the title of my lesson. Whose virus is this? The politicians are saying, recently, Democrat Senator Chris Murphy said, the reason that we're in the crisis that we are today is not because of anything that China did. It's not because of anything the World Health Organization did. It's because of what this president did. Quote, that's what he said. So he's blaming this virus on President Trump, and many in the media and also in the political arena have done the same. Well, let's see what old China has to say about this while all this is happening. The Chinese government accused the United States of causing the virus. The Chinese government also accused the United States of causing panic and spreading fear. So now they're pointing fingers at America. it's America. But you notice that when Trump, even the media is getting upset when Trump is calling this a China virus or the Wuhan virus. They're getting upset. Well, we're going to see, where did this thing come from? Whose virus is this? Because China permitted the citizens of Wuhan to hold a Lunar New Year celebration involving crowds that were numbered in the tens of thousands. It also allowed 5 million citizens of Wuhan to leave the city and then travel along with anyone they may have infected outside of China and around the world to celebrate the Lunar New Year abroad. So once this virus got out, and once the Chinese government knew about it, they didn't do anything about it. They allowed for it to spread. And this took place during their Lunar New Year. We've heard of the Chinese New Year. Sometimes they have the year of the tiger, the year of the dragon, and I think that this year is the year of the rat. And so the Chinese government allowed their citizens to continue to meet and gather, and then they allowed those citizens to take and leave. Many of those people who were infected, they allowed the over 5 million citizens to leave China and travel abroad, and that's how this thing spread. Let's look at it a little bit more. So who is Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus? I'm sure I haven't pronounced that name right, but he is, again, the head of WHO. Notice my little corny attempted pun there, the WHO, World Health Organization. Well, according to The Hill, he is not a medical doctor and had no global health management experience before China shoehorned him into the director's seat at the WHO, because prior to Dr. Tedros being in that position, there was a noted female doctor from China who held that position. Then again, although China knew the virus was intensely contagious, its officials assured the world that it was not transmittable from human to human. When this thing first got started, that's what the Chinese official says. Well, the reason I'm asking about this Tedros' role in it, because he repeated the same narrative. He repeated the lie, the misinformation, excuse me. Some people would say, well, that's a little harsh, but it was misinformation. China initially said that this virus was not transmittable human to human, and Dr. Tedros, is being the leader of the World Health Organization, he repeated that same message. Let's look a little bit into his background. Tedros is an Ethiopian communist and terrorist who served in the infamous Marxist dictatorship known as the Derg, which slaughtered thousands of its subjects. He went on to serve as an executive member of the Tigray Liberation Front, an organization listed in the Global Terrorism Database, and as Ethiopia's foreign minister, that is, for a country known as Little China. So China is busy gobbling up many nations, and part of them is also in parts of Africa, and Ethiopia is known as Little China because the Chinese communists have invested in it so heavily and made it a strategic bridge in their imperialist designs on the African continent. Well, let's look at the origins of other viruses. Let's look at some virus origins. China has an established history of originating pandemic level viruses. You have the 1956, you have the Asian flu. In 1968, you have the Hong Kong flu. These are all originated in China. Now, the Asian flu and the Hong Kong flu were responsible for the deaths of anywhere from 1 to 4 million people. Then you have SARS in 2002. It infected 8,098 people, killed 774, and it managed to spread to 17 countries. Then you have the H7N9, which is the avian flu, in March 2013. It struck at least 1,223 people and killed 4 out of every 10 people died. And of course, now you have the coronavirus. And also, isn't it interesting that we had also in 2010, we had the H1N1, and according to Reuters, as many as 80 million Americans were infected with the H1N1, which is the swine flu. Up to 16,000 of them had been killed and more than 360,000 were hospitalized. And this was according to Reuters in January 15, 2010. So we had that. Many people don't remember that, and how 80 million Americans were infected with this, and many people died and were hospitalized, and we didn't shut our economy down because of that. So again, it's mighty strange that all of a sudden now we're shutting down in the entire economy for this. But why should we surprise? Why is it racist to call this a Chinese virus when many viruses originate out of China? So a virus is not racist. Neither would it be racist to cite the origin of this virus. Let's look a little more. The Chinese Communist Party, the government threatened to withhold COVID-19 related pharmaceuticals from the United States, along with other medical technology and supplies. Once they knew that this happened, they gobbled up gowns and masks and ventilators to prevent other nations of having this. Why did they do that? Let's move on. The Chinese government has also a post-virus strategy based on leveraging depressed Western markets. So once this pandemic shut down Western markets and affected Western markets, they already had a post-virus strategy on how they were going to gobble those economies up. The Chinese government has not closed its borders. At the same time, the United States and other countries closed their borders. And then also, let's look at some of the origin, some of the earliest known facts about this virus. November 17, 2019, the original case, or other what's called the patient zero of this novel meaning the new coronavirus, emerged according to official Chinese government sources, but was not recognized at the time. Also, there's a timeline. If anyone is interested in following a timeline, you can go to the Center for Security Policy website and access a document by a Dr. Michael Waller. I think his name is Dr. Michael Waller, and he does a complete timeline. It's a 135-page timeline that specifically outlines all of this, so it gives you all the details. Of course, obviously, we're not going to go through the entire timeline in this presentation, but for those who are interested, you can access it and see the entire timeline for yourself. But December 1st, 2019, the first known patient started experiencing symptoms on December 1st, 2019. He had not been to the Huainan seafood wholesale market. No epidemiological link could be found between this case and the later case, because the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, the narrative that came out of there, first they delayed the information, but once they started releasing the information, they blamed it on that Wuhan wet market. And they said it came from a bat that's in the Wuhan wet market. Let's go on and find out if that's the case. In 2019, the Chinese state broadcaster CCTV, which is the official communist Chinese news propaganda source, it broadcast on January 12, 2020, that a new viral outbreak was first detected in the city of Wuhan, China, on December 12, 2019. So their official news source says that the outbreak was in Wuhan, China. So why are we upset when we call it a Chinese virus? When the president calls it a Chinese virus, why all of a sudden that's something that's wrong? Also, December 26, 2019, a laboratory identified the coronavirus as closely related to a SARS-like virus from the sample collected in December. Then in December 30th, 2019, Wuhan doctor Li Wenling disclosed on a chat service that the hospital had patients with severe flu-like symptoms. The doctor was subsequently detained by authorities and warned not to be spreading rumors online and not to be severely disrupting the social order. So he was threatened by the Chinese Communist Party not to be spreading rumors online, and also don't disrupt the social orders. Well, unfortunately, everyone's seen on the news that this young doctor contracted the COVID-19. He was hospitalized and he died in February 2020. So there you have a silenced voice. But then also the Wuhan medical authorities forbade doctors from making public announcements and ordered them to report cases internally. And then that's when the World Health Organization came in, got on board. So the WHO issued a disease outbreak notice that stated at this stage, there is no infection among healthcare workers and no clear evidence of human to human transmission. So those are exactly the Chinese Communist Government Party talking points. This is who the United States and the rest of the world is relying on information coming from the WHO, from Dr. Tedros, who, when this entire thing starts, he's already giving out talking points of the Chinese Communist Party. Well, then, coming to America, how did it get to the United States? January 19, 2020, Washington State reports America's patient zero, the first COVID-19 case in the United States. He is a 35-year-old male who had visited family in Wuhan, China. So that's how it got here in the United States, and then it starts spreading throughout there because, again, many Chinese nationals traveled to the United States, business people, students, people visiting family, and that was all before our borders were shut down and the president put a ban on travel, receiving travel from China and other countries. Well, also it's interesting. There's a young student by name of Shizong Jin. He's a 30-year-old Chinese national. He was arrested back in December 10th, 2019 at Boston's Logan International Airport and charged by criminal complaint with attempting to smuggle 21 vials of biological research to China. Now, some of the resources talk about how this biological research was just cancer research, but this young man tried to smuggle these vials back to China in his sock. But also, simultaneously, he was arrested along with another doctor and another Chinese national, a female student. And this American doctor, I believe his name is Dr. Charles Lieber or something like that. He was the chair of the Harvard chemistry department. And it turns out that he was working with the Chinese government. He was a spy. He was the chair of the chemistry department at Harvard, and he was being paid $50,000 a month by the Chinese Communist Party. He also had a $1.5 million grant given for his research, and he was given $150,000 here, there, and there. So this man was doing work. He was arrested. Go look it up. It's in your news. He was arrested, and this Zhezong Qin, also this 30-year-old Chinese national, was arrested also with him trying to smuggle these vials out of Harvard University, the chemistry department. And then there was also another female student who was arrested as well. And here, when they arrested her, they found out that she was a lieutenant in the People's Liberation Army. That is the Chinese Communist Army, the People's Liberation Army. She was a lieutenant and also a member of the Chinese Communist Party. She was arrested right along with these individuals. It's in your news cycle. Look it up and read about it. Dr. Charles Lieber, I think his name is, who was he was the chair of the Harvard chemistry department, was arrested with these individuals. So we see they're involved. And this is Dr. Shi Zhengli. Well, who is Dr. Shi Zhengli? Let's go back a little while. Let's go back a few years. In October 21st, 2014, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services suspended the University of North Carolina's research. Then Dr. Shi Zhengli transitioned to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So she was in the United States doing research. She is a virologist, and she was doing research on various viruses, and it was happening here in the United States, in North Carolina, the Chapel Hills campus. Well, Barack Obama, to his credit, he shut down that lab at the university for fear of something like this breaking out. But when they shut that down, well, she just went back home to Wuhan. And some of her research, what she was doing was, the research was to combine existing SARS coronavirus genetic material together with the spike protein to make it more communicable. Dr. Shi is also known as the Bat Woman. So she has done a lot of researches. You can go online and find out that she goes and goes to bat caves, and she retrieves these bats, brings them back to her lab, and does a lot of study and research. Now, again, obviously, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a virologist, but I'm going to show you where I've gotten some of my information and did the research. I'm going to show you some of those resources so you can look it up for yourself. Uh, the Wuhan Laboratory. Let's look at the Wuhan Laboratory. February 24th, 2020, Breitbart News followed up on a Post article to amplify that the Wuhan facility is one of China's 2 bioweapons research labs. So not only do they do research on viruses, but they're also a bioweapons research lab. Also, the coronavirus did not come from bats sold at the Wuhan seafood market in Wuhan, China, as is reported by the Chinese Communist Party and also by the WHO, and of course, consequently or subsequently by our news media as well. They're saying it was due to bats because people were eating bats. Bats were being sold in the Wuhan market. But there are many testimonies that said that there were no bats sold in the Wuhan market. But what this woman, Dr. Shi, she would travel 1,000 miles away from the Wuhan market to these caves, get these bats, the horseshoe bats, and then bring them back to Wuhan in the virology lab and do these experiments with them. So according to sources, it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology lab in Wuhan, China, where researchers deliberately experiment on ways to make existing and synthetic viruses more communicable and more effective at getting inside human cells. You might ask yourselves, well, why in the world would they do something like that? Well, let's look a little further. Let's look at the Wuhan laboratory again. This novel or new coronavirus is a synthetic hybrid. In other words, it's put together, or what's known as a chimera. Now notice, remember when we started this presentation and I asked whose virus is this? Well, is this a judgment sent from God? Is this a curse sent from Satan? Is this something as a natural result of the fall of human man? Or was this generated out of the evil hearts of fallen men? And my contention is leaning toward that direction, and not just mine, but there are others, and I'll give you the sources. But so there are many who are saying that this is a chimera. Well, what's a chimera? Chimera is an organism or an organ or part consisting of 2 or more tissues of different genetic composition produced as a result of grafting or genetic engineering. So they take a various virus and they cobble them together. In other words, it's a gene or a protein consisting of parts from 2 different genes or proteins that are normally distinct and sometimes derived from 2 different species. Well, this coronavirus, now let's look at this coronavirus. And this is coming out of some of the information that we're gathering, that individuals are gathering, people who are certainly more skilled and professional than I am, and I'll show you their sources. This is what some of them are saying. This is some people who are virologists, who have studied viruses for 40 years. This is what they are saying. It is shown to be, talking about this coronavirus, it was shown to be capable of robust viral replication both in vitro, that means in the lab, in the Petri dish, and in vivo, in other words, in animals. The researchers created something artificially in the lab that never before existed. So this is not a naturally occurring virus. This is according to them. This is what they're saying. And likely never would have existed purely by nature. There are some individuals who are calling this a Frankenstein virus. And this Frankenstein virus somehow got out. It was either released intentionally or accidentally. However it was done, we don't know that, but it did get out. And what some of these people were saying is that this virus is a compilation of the SARS virus, which is a respiratory virus, attacks the respiratory, HIV, which attacks the immunity system, the immune system, and then you have the corona. So SARS is corona 1, and what we're facing with this COVID-19 is corona 2. It is a type of a SARS virus. It's a coronavirus. So you had MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. Then you had SARS, also, which is a respiratory virus. Sudden, I can't think of it right now. I have it written down. But anyway, these are all related viruses. But also the Chinese Communist Party, they covered this up to protect its image. Then they ordered the destruction of the virus samples. Once they got out, they ordered the destruction. So it's almost like getting rid of cleaning up the scene of the crime. The Wuhan market was closed down and scrubbed because remember they said they blame this outbreak on the market. Well, what they did is they shut it down and they scrubbed it. And then also the CDC scientists from America were denied visas to go and to do investigation on this. So what this does is it causes suspicion in people's minds. It causes conspiracy theories, if you will, to rise because you ask the question, why? Why is the Chinese Communist Party doing this? What do they have to hide? Well, there's a fellow by the name of Michael Pillsbury. Michael Pillsbury is a Chinese expert. He is an expert in Mandarin. He is an expert in the Chinese culture, and he was used by our government from the 1970s up until I believe he retired, left government. I forget what year. But Michael Pillsbury, he is an expert on Chinese culture, and he wrote a book called The 100-Year Marathon, and the subtopic is China's Secret Strategy to Replace America as the Global Superpower. And in it, he details their plan, and he talks about how he has dealt with China for many years, and their chief weapon against America is a political warfare. It's deception, and they use it. So this is a very interesting read for anyone who's interested in China's goals and their plans that they have been following secretly, stealthily, if you will, for many years. Could this be a part of their plan to use a virus to do this? Then also, there are two Chinese colonels who wrote a book entitled Unrestricted Warfare. We see Colonel Liang and Colonel Wang. You figure out and you pronounce it. But anyway, the title of their book, Unrestricted Warfare, and notice the subtitle, China's Master Plan to Destroy America. So both of these books are laying out a plan. It was originally published in 1999 by China's People Liberation Army. And then basically the premise of this book is by these two colonels. The United States is not capable of defending itself against hostilities waged at the political warfare level. So they're talking about using political warfare, using biological warfare, using other means because America is a military superpower. There is no one who's able to take America on militarily. Many of these nations know that. So they use other means of warfare. And so that's what this book is about. It's basically a blueprint on how a lesser or an inferior government will be able to take on a superior government without their citizens, without a shot being fired, and without the citizens and the people knowing whatever hit them, basically. Part of the language in this book, it says, this is because America has never taken into consideration and have even refused to consider the means that the contrary to tradition and to select measures of operation other than military means. In other words, the American method of handling and solving differences is blowing things up and killing people. That's what the American military does. So they're not equipped to handle other means of warfare. That's what these Chinese generals or colonels are advocating. And so they wrote a book detailing China's master plan on how to destroy America. Could this be a part of that plan? That's all I'm asking. Here are the two uh, Chinese colonels here who wrote this unrestricted warfare. Then also out of this, we see emerging in the Christian community, if some who are paying attention, we see this what's called red green access. I've made videos about this before and talked about the red green access. The red representing communism, the green representing Islam. You know, the subtitle of my lesson when I talk about and I ask the question, whose virus is this? Well, the subtitle was the rulers of this world have gathered themselves together against the Lord and against his anointed. Communism and Islam have a common ideology. As a matter of fact, some people refer to Islam as communism with a God. We know that communism is largely atheistic. Islam, they have a deity. Their deity they call Allah. But they are joining forces, as we can see here. Let's look at this quote, and then I'll talk about and I'll mention where I'm going with this. In July 12, 2019, President of Turkey, Erdogan, meets with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing to boost global stability as both nations' relationship with the United States are tested over economic and diplomatic disputes. Turkey sees that China is on the rise and that if the world order is changing, one of its leaders will be China. So they mention a world order. There have been much topic or conversation talking about a world order, a new world order. And the reason why I subtitled this is the rulers of this world have gathered themselves together. World leaders such as Islam and communism, who were once at odds with each other, enemies, opposed to each other, although they have very similar ideologies. They're both totalitarian in nature. Well, they are joining forces from the early 600 A.D. or 600 A.D. when Muhammad started his religion, all the way up until the early 1900s, the 19th century, after World War I, when Islam during the Ottoman Empire was defeated. So that for over 1,300 years, Islam, their war was against Christianity, against Judaism, against Christianity. They hated the gods of the Christian. They hated the God of the Jews. Their ideologies is taught to basically be opposed to the teachings of the Judeo-Christian aspect. When they were defeated, when the Ottoman Empire was defeated in World War I, that empire was brought down and they became in more compliance with the Western world. But after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, after World War I, we noticed that another ideology rose to take its place, and that was communism. In 1917, Vladimir Lenin, he founded the Soviet, the Russian Revolution, to where he implemented the ideals of Marxism into the Russian government, and he started the USSR in 1917. So again, that's shortly after the fall of Islam. Here goes the red axis growing, and Marx, one of Marx's statements, he in furthering the ideology and the view of communism, Marx said that his chief goal was to dethrone God and destroy capitalism. So we see that both Islam and communism have something in common. Therefore, the red-green axis, where one group failed in its stated goal to destroy the West, therefore Christianity, the other picks up, and now they have joined forces. That red-green axis, the rulers of this world have gathered themselves together, and they have a common enemy. And the common enemy of Islam and communism is the West, i.e. Christianity, God, Jesus, the gospel of Jesus Christ, the church, the family, America, the rest of the world, the West, because of our Christian biblical views and because of the idea also of capitalism. Communism's chief goal is to destroy capitalism. Could it be that they are using this virus, the globalists are using this virus to finally arrive at what they believe is pulling down the West, therefore destroying Christianity and anything that is ordained by God. And so that's the premise. Here are some of my resources. Some of my resources. I want you to go and go to YouTube and access Sharia Crime Stoppers. And there's a former CIA agent by the name of Claire Lopez, a very gifted woman. She was 20 years in the CIA. She has a video called Made in China. And so she discusses most of what I was talking about. And of course, I'm not speaking for Claire, and I'm not saying that everything that I said, Claire is saying. So I want to give that disclaimer. Claire has her views, and I agree with many of them, and she represents them. But then also, I'm coming from a Christian perspective. She was talking purely from a natural aspect, where this virus came from and how it came to be. So she discusses that in the video she titles Made in China. Then also there's a fellow by the name of Joshua Phillip. He's a journalist, investigative journalist for the Epoch Times. And you can go to YouTube and access this also. And many of you probably have already watched it. And it's called Tracking Down the Origin of the Wuhan Coronavirus Documentary. And it's an excellent documentary. In it, he draws together professionals. He draws together doctors who are virologists, who have studied disease and viruses, and they give their expertise. And he also draws in, and he refers to those two books that I mentioned as well. Then you have a fellow by the name of Stephen Coughlin and Rich Higgins, and the name of their website is Unconstrained Analytics. These guys also are professionals. They're former military, and they're professionals in their field, and they wrote an article. It's called The Formation of COVID-19 Red Team, published April 6, 2020. And they do excellent. These guys are experts. And you go and just inform yourself. Read up on some of these things. And then, as I mentioned, Michael Pillsbury's book. All of these individuals mention Michael Pillsbury's book and also these two Chinese colonels. And so, again, they raised the question and issue. And so I asked the same thing. Could this pandemic that we're in be generated because for a goal and for a mean that's been in planning for many years? Do your own homework, do your own research, find out if these things are so. Now, that ends part number 1. I'm going to stop the video here, and then I'm going to start up just for the sake of time and little management of time, because I don't want these videos to go too long. And so this is part 1. Take a look at it, think about it, and we'll see what it has to say. I'll give you a little preview on the next video. We're going to look at and see what the scriptures have to say. What does the Bible have to say about these things? Romans chapter number 15, verses 4, because this is where the Christians, this is where we hang all of our hopes. We don't hang our hopes on media. We don't hang our hopes on scientists. We don't deny what scientists say. We're not here. We're not anti-science, but we don't get our marching orders. Scientists study viruses and diseases, and we believe what they say, but we don't hang our hopes and hats on it. That's why the op-ed misinterprets us and says we're the science deniers. That's not true. What we do is, but we place our hope in the scriptures. What does God's word have to say about all of these events? And so Romans 15:4 says, for whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope. And so in part number 2, that's what we're going to do. We're going to appeal the scriptures to see what the word of God has to say about these matters. God bless you. We'll see you in part number 2.